Hi guys, welcome. Hope you're all doing good. Let us start off with another session of news in 30 minutes on the 27th of October 2023. Okay, so the first important issue of the day is the curious case of diverging inflation rates. Before I start explaining this, you can read this article in New Indian Express. The author has written the article beautifully. Usually what happens when they write articles, the person or editor who's writing the article, this article talks about two things. One, it talks about the perspective about WPI and CPI. Not only that, the author also explains what is WPI and CPI in detail. Okay, very rarely you see both the things in an article. The article usually explains about the phenomena, or it gives different perspectives about the phenomena. Explaining as well as making people understand about the phenomena is something very rare that you see in the article. So this article very beautifully has written not only about the phenomena but also different perspective about that phenomena. All right, let us get on with it. The curious case of diverging inflation rates. Okay, so the article mainly focuses on CPI WPI difference in India that can be attributed to the different basket of items in each index and the relative weights of these items. So let me give you a context of what is this diverging inflation rates. Okay, so if I take CPI and if I take WPI, as you know, CPI is consumer price index, whereas WPI is wholesale price index. Okay, now before I get into the technicalities of explaining you the concept, I'll just tell what is the current rates that is going on in CPI. CPI has been reducing of late, whereas WPI is increasing. Okay, so when I say CPI is reducing, it means if I take August to September, the CPI has reduced from 6.8% to 5%. See, the CPI is reducing. Whereas if I take WPI from July to September, if I take, in July the WPI was minus 1.23. Now in September it has risen to minus 0.26%. One thing what you should observe is WPI has been in negative category or in the negative zone for the last 6 months. WPI has been in the negative months in the last 6 months. It has been in the negative zone. However, it is slowly rising. It was minus 1.23 and now it has gone to minus 0.26. So it is rising. Okay, so if you see, on one side CPI is reducing, on the other side WPI is increasing. Why is it that these two inflationary indices are diverging in India? This is the entire article, and the author also beautifully explains not only the reasons but also about these indices as well. So before I explain you the reason why they are diverging, let me give you a background of what is CPI and what is WPI. Okay, you should have a very good idea about these indices. Before that, let me just tell you what are price indices. Okay, what are price indices? Price indices basically tracks price changes. It tracks price changes at various transactions in the supply chain. Okay, it tracks price changes in various transactions in the supply chain. Okay, so within the supply chain, if you track the price changes at various transactions, what can be the two places where I can trace the price changes? The two places can be from producer or manufacturer to wholesaler. This is one way I can trace the price changes. Another is retailer to end customer. Okay, this is another way I can trace the price changes. Okay, so if I trace the price change of goods here, if I trace the price change of goods between the producer and the wholesaler, then this becomes WPI. Okay, and if I track the price changes at this mode of transaction between retailer and end consumer, then I know that this becomes CPI. Okay, so consumer price indices usually reflect the price changes that affects the end consumer or customer. The WPI, that is wholesale price index, usually reflects the price changes that affects the wholesalers as well as the producers. Okay, so this is the two indices. Okay, now there's another concept called headline inflation. Okay, headline inflation is basically inflation that actually depicts the economy of the country. So if you have to talk about the inflation of India, okay, inflation of India, then headline inflation basically represents the inflation of Indian economy. Okay, so it is like a representative of Indian economy. Okay, now we can use WPI also as representative of Indian economy, CPI also as representative of Indian economy. However, in 2014, okay, RBI decided to use CPI. Okay, decided to use CPI as the representative of headline inflation. Okay, to be more specific, it uses something called CPI combined. I'll come back to this, what is it? But headline inflation in India is mainly CPI combined. Okay, in other words, what it means is the Monetary Policy Committee. Okay, if it has to, make sure that the inflation remains within the target, the inflation has to remain within the target. That inflation that it targets is basically the CPI combined. I hope you understood this. This is known as headline inflation. Okay, so coming back to WPI and CPI, so you understood what is headline inflation. Now coming back to CPI, there are basically 4 types of CPI. You have CPI industrial workers, you have CPI agricultural laborers, you have CPI rural laborers, and then you have CPI combined. When I say combined, it has combination of rural as well as urban baskets. Okay, so the items in the basket will be representative of both rural population as well as representative of urban population. That is known as CPI combined. Okay, let's just go to the next page. So we were talking about WPI. One second. We were talking about WPI and we were talking about CPI. So there were 4 types. We have CPI IW, CPI AL, and CPI RL. Okay, these 3 indices are brought about by Labor Bureau. Okay, and the last one, CPI combined, okay, is brought about by NSO of MOSPI. As you know, Labor Bureau belongs to Ministry of Labor and Employment. Okay, whereas National Statistical Organization comes under the Ministry of MOSPI. Okay, so these are broadly the 4 types of CPI. Okay, that is one thing. The next is, since CPI assesses the price changes between retailers and end customers, it is basically used to assess the cost of living index, because it represents the changes at the end customer level. Okay, you usually see it to assess the cost of living index. That is one more point. Now if I take CPI, we have to also know the weightages for prelims perspective. The weightage is 1, you have food, okay, and beverages. The second you have is housing. The third you have is fuel and light. And the fourth you have is clothing and footwear. Okay, and the last is miscellaneous. Okay, so if I take this as the basket, okay, food and beverages will occupy 46%, housing will occupy 10%, fuel and light will occupy 7%, clothing and footwear will occupy 7%, miscellaneous will occupy 28%. As you can see very carefully here, food and beverages occupy almost half of CPI. Okay, I'll come back to this, but this, having a sense of these facts is very important. Okay, so one, you learned that the price changes that happens between retailers and end customers is what is CPI. CPI combined is used as a measure for headline inflation. Monetary Policy Committee also tracks this CPI combined. CPI are of 4 types. CPI IW, AL and RL are compiled by the Labor Bureau, that comes under Ministry of Labor and Employment. CPI combined is compiled by NSO, that comes under MOSPI, and the weightage of CPI is basically such that the food and beverages occupy almost 46%, Housing comes with 10%. Then comes the fuel and light. Again, look at this. The fuel and light occupies very less in CPI, almost 7%. And clothing and footwear 7%, and miscellaneous is 28%. Okay. Now, if I have to talk about WPI, okay. Now, WPI is compiled by Ministry of Commerce. Okay, it is compiled by Ministry of Commerce, and since this tracks price changes between producers and wholesalers, okay, it basically tracks price changes between producers and wholesalers. It is it basically reflects the sentiments of producer prices index. Okay, so it shows what is the emotion, or what is the sentiments surrounding producer prices in India. If the WPI is high, that means that the producers are getting good amount of money for their products. If the producer prices, or if the WPI is very low, that means that the producers or manufacturers are not getting enough money. So it kind of signals the sentiment around the producers or manufacturers. Okay, so this WPI, okay, basically as the weightage. I'm talking about the weightage now. WPI weightage. If we talk about the WPI weightage, one, you have primary articles. Okay, the second you have fuel and power, and the third you have manufacturing products. I hope you got this. There are broadly 3 types. Okay, so you have one, primary articles. This is assigned 22.6%. Then you have fuel and power, that is assigned 13.2%. And then you have manufactured products, that is given the major chunk, 64.2%. Okay, now just to give you a background, this primary articles, when I say primary articles will have both food articles as well as non-food articles. When we say non-food articles, it means minerals, basically minerals. Okay, so primary articles as food articles as well as non-food articles. Okay, fuel and power, as you know, it has diesel, it has petroleum and other things. Manufactured products also has food products as well as non-food products. Okay, so it has food products and non-food products. Okay, now if I take food articles from primary articles and food products from manufactured products, then these two will go on to become food index. That is how we prepare food index. So food index is basically food articles from primary articles, and it is food products from manufacturing products. If I take these two and if I add, this is known as food index. Okay, this comes up to the weightage of 24.4%. That is the weightage of the goods food index within WPI. Okay, so this is overall weightage of WPI. What you should understand is, one thing that you should have in your mind is, in WPI, manufactured products is almost 60%. Okay, 60% of the dedicated weightage is basically more inclined towards manufactured articles. Whereas here in CPI, the weightage of majority chunk of the weightage is given to food and beverages. Okay, one more you have to observe is fuel prices. In CPI, it is 7%, whereas in WPI, it is almost 13.7%. So can I say CPI, okay, WPI will have almost 2x of CPI in terms of fuel. Okay, WPI is almost having 2x weightage compared to CPI when it comes to fuel prices. Okay, now this understanding is very important for the next analysis that I am going to do. Okay, so I hope you got an understanding of what CPI is, what WPI is. Why is WPI important? Because it talks about the price changes at the producer level, whereas why CPI is important? Because it talks about the price changes at the customer level, okay, or consumer level. Alright, so because it talks about at the consumer level, cost of living index is representative of CPI. Because this talks about producer, the producer price index is more representative of WPI. Okay, so with that and all the other weightages that you got to know, now let us go into analysis of why CPI and WPI have diverging tendencies. Okay, as I told you, CPI is coming down, WPI is rising up. So why is CPI and WPI having diverging tendencies? The first is items in the basket and their relative weights changes. As you get to know that items in the basket okay, in WPI are relatively different compared to CPI, and also their weights. Okay, for example, as I told you, food occupies a very important part in CPI, whereas manufacturing products occupy a very important chunk of weightage in WPI. Okay, see, if you know the basics, elaborating these points becomes very easy. Okay, so that is the first point. The second is services. Okay, WPI does not have services at all, whereas CPI includes services. And CPI, the services that is included is given the weightage of around 28.32%. The weightage assigned to services in CPI is almost 28.32%. Okay. The next is weights of items calculated in both the indices are different. Okay. The calculation of weightage of items is different. For example, let me tell you, in WPI, the weightage of items is calculated on the basis of production values. Whereas in CPI, it is calculated on the proportion of household expenditure on those items. Let me tell you what it means. WPI, the weights of the items are calculated on the basis of production value. So let us say if there is one X as an item, that X as an item, if the production of that X is very high in India, then the weightage to that particular product called X will also be higher. So the weightage of items are purely based on the production values when it comes to WPI. Whereas if you take CPI, the weightage of the items are based on how much that the household will spend on that particular item. Okay, if the households on an average spend higher on this particular Y, then the Y will have higher weightage. If the households on an average spend less on this item called Z, then the weightage of that Z will be lower. So the calculation of CPI is done on the basis of household average expenditure on that item, whereas WPI, the calculation is done on the basis of production values. Okay, so because the calculation is also different, it always diverges. The last is prices used in both indices. Okay, so in WPI, they use X factory prices. What are X factory prices? So in WPI, they use X factory prices, which means, let us say that there is X that is produced from the factory. This X, the price of the cost of production of X, that is known as X factory prices. Okay, it means it does not have transportation cost, it does not have customs, it does not have excise, nothing is included. The only thing that is included is the cost of production of X. That is known as X factory prices. So debarring transportation cost or any types of taxes, whatever the cost of production is there, that is known as X factory prices, and this is what WPI is based on. Whereas if you take CPI, okay, CPI is basically based on the retail prices in the markets. Okay, so how are the prices calculated? By going to different markets and identifying how much does tomato cost, how much does potato cost. By identifying the retail prices of in the market, we try to assign the prices to CPI. Okay, so these are the four ways why four ways or the four reasons why CPI and WPI diverges. So let me just summarize. One, the CPI and WPI have different items, and within the items there are different weights. The second is services as a fact is not considered in WPI. Services are put in CPI, and in CPI the services comes up to almost 28.32%. The third is the weights of these items are calculated differently. In WPI they are calculated on the basis of production values, whereas in the CPI they are calculated on the average household expenditure on those items. And the last is prices used is in the WPI it is X factory prices, and in the CPI they use the retail market prices. Okay, because the methodology of CPI and WPI is differing, there is always divergence between CPI as well as WPI. Okay, so this is not always divergence, but there is usually divergence between CPI and WPI. Okay, so this is what is this article talking about. Okay, the next is, let me talk about the case study of monsoon failure. Let us assume that India on some year there was monsoon failure. If there was monsoon failure, the food production reduces. When the food production reduces, obviously the food prices will go up. If the food prices go up, it affects CPI more than WPI. The reason it affects CPI more than WPI is because in CPI, the food occupies almost 46%, whereas in WPI, the food occupies less than 22%. So because CPI has greater amount of weightage assigned to food, whenever there is food deficit production, the CPI will shoot up. Okay, so I hope you understood how monsoons are related to CPI. Now take another case of rise in global oil prices. Whenever there is some international disharmony, or let us say there is some disruption, for example there is Russia-Ukraine war, or there is now Israel-Palestine war, whenever there is international disruptions, the global oil prices rises. When the oil prices rises, that means WPI gets affected more than CPI, because WPI has 13% or 13.7% to be exact, the weightage, compared to just 7% in CPI. Almost 2x times the CPI is WPI value. So because the weightage of WPI is more, that means that the WPI will shoot up compared to CPI. Okay, so fuel prices decide the movement in WPI and food prices decide the movement in CPI. Hence, you always see the divergence between WPI and CPI. Okay, so this is what is the entire article talking about. The article just tells that WPI should not be neglected. As I told you, the Reserve Bank of India is now concentrating on CPI combined because CPI combined is considered as the headline inflation. However, WPI is also very, very important because it produces or it acts as deflator in several sectors. Okay, it acts as deflator in several sectors of the economy, especially in manufacturing sector. And manufacturing sector is very, very important in India. Okay, that is one reason why WPI should not be neglected. The second reason is because several business contracts traces WPI, or it's dependent on WPI. Okay, the next is investors. Global investors always look at WPI to make their investment decisions. Okay, hence this WPI acts as the producer's side of the story. Okay, so it gives us the sentiment that is there from the producer's side or the manufacturing side in the economy. If the WPI is constantly going down, that means that there is some problem on the producers or manufacturing side, and this disincentivizes manufacturing and production in the economy. Thus, in turn, will disrupt the entire economy. For that reason, WPI is an index that must be considered and should not be neglected in Indian economy. Okay, so I hope overall you understood what is this curious case of diverging inflation rates. Now, as you saw, this article is very elaborative and very well written. Not only will it give you, very good insights into the basics of WPI and CPI, but it will also tell you why it diverges, and it gives you a perspective of why you should not neglect WPI when it comes to Indian economy. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Let us go to the next one. The next article is the dirty hands of the 5 I's. Okay, so basically in this article, the author is cautioning India about this 5 I's. Okay, what is this 5 I's? That is all that is important in this article. The 5 I's is an exclusive intelligence sharing arrangement. Okay, it's an exclusive intelligence sharing arrangement between 5 countries. Okay, these countries are USA, Canada, then UK, then Australia and New Zealand. Okay, so these common English speaking nations, they have created exclusive intelligence sharing network, which they call as signal intelligence. They call this as signal intelligence. So that is what they keep sharing between themselves. These English speaking nations have come together to share their intelligence amongst these countries. Okay, so this 5 I's basically will segregate 2 types of countries. One is enemies, another is difficult partners. Okay, they have segregated it 2 ways. Enemies are basically Russia, China and Iran. Difficult countries as India, Turkey and Vietnam. Okay, so this is how they segregate. On the basis of enemies and difficult partners, they increase their sharing of intelligence and tracking of different signals that comes from these nations. Okay, now along with this 5 I's, you got to know 5 I's. if you include 4 more countries, it becomes 9 I's. Okay, so let me just come here. 5 I's plus, if you include France, then you have Netherlands, then you have Denmark, then you have Norway. Okay, so if you include 5 I's plus these 4 countries, then it becomes 9 I's. Okay, now with this, if you add 5 more countries, okay, they are Belgium, Germany, you have Spain, Italy, and then Sweden. Okay, now it becomes 14 I's. Okay, so these are some expansion of this intelligence sharing arrangement between the 5 nations and other nations in Europe. Okay, so basically all these nations come in Europe with USA. Okay, so I hope you got this. So these are some intelligence sharing network, and the author basically cautions India about these things, but those things are more political and geopolitical. However, this fact was important from prelims perspective. Okay, so have an eye on these such types of arrangements, because it can come directly in your prelims exam. So I hope you got the difference between 5 I's, 9 I's and 14 I's. Okay, so the next issue that we have to speak about is the forest certification. Okay, wildfire prevention, important tools for sustainable management. Okay, it is told by the Union Minister of Forest. The Union Minister of Forest, MOEFCC. Okay, so basically this article is talking about something called National Forest Certification Scheme. Okay, it's talking about National Forest Certification Scheme and how this certification scheme will help in reducing, forest fires. The reason it will help in reducing forest fire is because it will improve the quality of management of forests. Because it improves the quality of management of forests, in that way it will reduce the forest fires. Okay, so one stat given by our Minister of Forest is, this stat you can make a note of it. In India, okay, according to the Forest Survey of India, more than 50% of forests in India are prone to forest fires. More than 50% of forest cover in India is prone to forest fires. I'll repeat again. According to Forest Survey of India, more than 50% of forest cover in India is prone to forest fires. Of different degrees, of course, but more than 50%. The next, one more stat is, this accounts to almost 3.73 million hectares. It accounts to almost 3.73 million hectares of forest fires annually. Okay, it accounts to 3.73 million hectares of forest fire annually. Okay, so this fact you can use anywhere. Forest fire is a very important burning issue that you should know. Okay, so this is one thing. What our Union Minister is telling, that they have come up with something called National Forest Certification Scheme that will help improve the management of forests, which in turn will reduce the frequency of forest fires that we experience in India. Okay, so now the next pertinent issue is, what exactly is this National Forest Certification Scheme? Okay, let us understand what exactly it means. The first is, it is nothing but a tool. Okay, it is a tool for promotion of sustainable utilization. Okay, sustainable utilization and sustainable conservation of forest. Okay, it is a tool for sustainable utilization as well as conservation of forests. Okay, so the first thing what it does is, it will help in labeling, tracking and monitoring. Okay, what will it help in tracking, labeling and monitoring? It will track, label or monitor wood and pulp and timber products. It will also help in labeling, tracking and monitoring non-timber forest produce. Okay, so this labeling, tracking and monitoring both wood, timber products as well as non-timber products will give a proper inventory of the movement of goods that happens within the forest. Okay, so that is the first objective. The first objective is labeling, tracking and monitoring wood, pulp and timber products as well as non-timber products. The next is certification. Okay, the certification is done on the basis of social, environmental and economic perspectives. The forest certification, I'm talking about the forest certification. This certification will be done on not only one perspective, that is environmental, but it will be done on social perspective also. It will also be done on economic perspective. Okay, so this will boost the quality of forest not only from environmental angle, but will also boost our extraction of the forest resources to improve our economy. It will also boost the social factors within the forest, that is the indigenous people. Okay, so the certification will take into consideration social, environmental as well as economic perspectives when it has to certify. The third is the certification is done by an independent party, and this independent party will certify a forest on the basis of some standards that are already in set. So some standards that are already defined. To be more specific, some standards that are defined. So the forest certification is done by an independent party. Okay, that independent party will certify on the basis of some defined standards. Okay, this will remove the scope of discretion amongst that particular party which is certifying the forest. Okay, the next is it will bolster the forest contribution to India's GDP. As I told you, because we are certifying on the basis of economic perspective also, it can help us improve the forest to be extracted sustainably to improve to contribute to the economy, correct? So it can also bolster the forest contribution to India's GDP. And there is one important fact here, the Indian forests contribution to India's GDP currently, okay, the forest contribution to India's GDP currently is almost 1.7% of GDP. This is currently the forestry's contribution to India's GDP. Okay, so with the forest certification scheme, this will definitely improve to more than 2%. Okay, that is another objective of forest certification scheme. The next is industries. It will help industries use forest products or produces sustainably. Industries are basically seen from a negative angle whenever we come to forests. They are seen as agents of deforestation and degradation. So this perspective will change and industries will be seen from a positive angle with forest certification scheme. Because it is being done by the independent party that is taking economic perspective also, industries will be given an opportunity to use the forest sustainably. Okay. The next is indigenous people. As we are certifying it from the basis of social angle also, it will promote the protection and preservation of indigenous people and their habitats. Okay, that is the next one. The next is it helps us conserve or give special emphasis. Okay, it uses special emphasis to high value trees. So these are some of the important aspects of forest certification scheme. So forest certification scheme will help in sustainable usage as well as management of forests. That is one. So forest certification scheme, by improving the quality of management of forests, will reduce the forest fires. How? One, it is going to help in labeling, tracking and monitoring timber products as well as non-timber products separately. The second is it helps in certifying from different perspectives, social, environmental and economical. The third is it's an independent body that will certify it, and this independent body will certify on the basis of some defined standards. The next is it will bolster forest contribution to India's GDP, which is just currently 1.75%. The next is industries can take part sustainably in the use of forest products and as well as forests. The next is indigenous people and their protection is also taken care of. And lastly, we can protect some high value trees within the forest as well. Okay, so these are some of the important aspects of what they have introduced, something called forest certification scheme. Again, this becomes very, very important because from environmental angle, more questions are coming from institutional level and not from basic conceptual level. So you should have a very good idea about this. Okay, so this is about this issue. The next issue is, I think this is the last issue. The next issue is India's green hydrogen move may worsen pollution if steps are not in place. Okay, anyways, this basically is given by an environmental angle where we have to take certain precautions before we go up with something called, we have National Green Hydrogen Mission. Okay, so it is more important for you to understand what is this green hydrogen mission. Green hydrogen mission basically talks about improving the green hydrogen production by 5 million tons. Okay, it is talking about usage of or production of green hydrogen by 5 million tons. So first of all, Ministry of Natural and Renewable Energy, okay, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, sorry, has defined what is green hydrogen. Okay, now see, what is green hydrogen? To produce 1 kg of hydrogen, if I emit 1 kg of CO2, then this is known as green hydrogen. Okay, however, if currently we have something called grey hydrogen, that is hydrogen that is derived from fossil fuels. Here, to produce 1 kg of hydrogen, we are producing, I mean, we are emitting 9 kg of CO2. See, in grey hydrogen, this is the problem. Grey hydrogen is hydrogen that is produced from fossil fuel. So to produce 1 kg of hydrogen, we are almost emitting 9 kg of CO2, which is unsustainable, which also adds up to global warming. So if we have to produce green hydrogen is when 1 kg of hydrogen is produced by only emitting 1 kg of CO2. Okay, so the national or the national green hydrogen mission tells that we have to produce green hydrogen to the tunes of up to 5 million tons by 2030. This is the green hydrogen mission. Now what you should also understand is, if we have to produce green hydrogen up to 5 million tons, we also have to improve our renewable energy capacity, because it is through renewable energy only we are able to produce green hydrogen. So green hydrogen mission, the first objective is to produce 5 million tons of green hydrogen. The second is to improve equivalent capacity, renewable energy capacity. Okay, now we need almost 125 gigawatts of energy to produce 5 million tons of green hydrogen. Okay, so where is this 125 gigawatts coming to us? It has to come to us by increasing the capacity. Okay, what you should not forget is the current renewable energy capacity of India. The current renewable energy capacity of India is somewhere between near 131 gigawatts. Okay, the current renewable energy capacity in India is let me write it here. So the current renewable energy capacity is, currently it is 131 gigawatts, and we have a target of creating 500 gigawatts by 2030. Okay, this is our goal in accordance with Paris Agreement. Okay, so this is our renewable energy scenario. As I told you, for green hydrogen, if we have to produce 5 million tons, we need a renewable energy capacity of almost 125 gigawatts. So it is not easy to create such huge capacity to produce green hydrogen. So we have to be cautious not to make sure that in our endeavor to create that capacity, we should not make sure that it harms the environment. So that is what this article mainly talks about. But what is important is for you to know what National Green Hydrogen Mission is, what exactly is green hydrogen in accordance to the definition of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, and what is the current renewable energy scenario in India. So I hope this information was helpful. Okay, and I hope you understood how by studying current affairs over a period of time, you will brush up on your basics so many times that you need not go back to your basics books at all. You will start revising more and more in current affairs itself. Okay, that happens only if you reverse engineer. If the article is talking about WPI and CPI, you have to learn what is WPI and CPI, also the basic aspects of it within the article itself. So once you do that, you don't have to go back to the standard books for static. The static also gets revised in the current affairs itself. Okay, so I hope this session was helpful. Please make sure that you like, share, subscribe and share with your friends so that it can reach as many users as possible. Thank you for all the support, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.